This was originally going to be a Soulsborne scaling video, but I decided to scrap it because it just wasn't fun to write and I couldn't get the video to flow well. So instead of that, you guys are getting a Bleach video. I've seen a lot of people asking for a Bleach video in the comments, so here you go. Bleach is easily the most downplayed verse out of the big three. Like, I've legitimately seen people say that the verse caps out at mountain level, and that Ichigo is weaker than Luffy. Now, I could see people thinking Naruto wins due to the universal metas for Naruto, but Luffy? Really? So let's do Ichigo's on Justice and go over just how powerful he really is, from all the way back during the Soul Society up until now. A good starting point for the scaling would be Ichigo, Chad, Uryu, Orihime, and Ganjo powering the Reishikaku to break through the Sarate's barrier, which resulted in the entire city shaking. The size of the Sarate is never directly stated, but based off of this statement from Yoriichi, the circumference of the wall should be around 4,896 kilometers with a diameter of 1,558 kilometers. Knowing that, we can calculate the energy output of the earthquake, which would be around 1.8 gigatons of TNT. Given that there were 5 of them, we would need to divide this value by 5 to find that each of them individually should be around mountain level. Now, Ichigo did put in significantly more spiritual pressure than the rest, and as such he would be stronger, which is pretty obvious, but it's not enough to say that Shikai Ichigo would be above mountain level at the time. Still, this immediately disproves any notion that Ichigo caps out at mountain level. Ichigo then also gets a massive power boost when training to achieve Bankai, as right after this training, he's able to stop the Sokyoku at its full power, and is able to destroy the Taka, which is able to withstand the force of the Sokyoku. The Sokyoku having been stated to possess the power to destroy the Sarate and the Soul Society. Destroying the Soul Society seems to be more of an over time thing, but based on how it is described, it is safe to assume that its power could obliterate the entire Sarate in one go. To do something like this, it would need to have a power equal to roughly 38 teratons of TNT, or country level. Ichigo can then stack Bankai and Holification on top of this, with Bankai being a 5 to 10 times increase in power and the Hollow Mask being the same. Ichigo's Bankai is a stat boosting type and is clearly on the stronger side, so I'm going to say that it is a 10 times amp. This would mean that the Hollow Mask and Bankai combo would be a 100 times amp, putting Ichigo at Continental Plus all the way back in the Soul Society. This is consistent with things we see during the Arrancar arc, but I'll get into that in a bit. First, we need to discuss the speed for this arc. Uryu in this arc is able to outspeed his own shadow, moving at around 1.5 times the speed of light. Now, he didn't do this with his base speed, and it was instead the result of his Hirenkyaku, but even someone like Mayuri is able to follow Uryu's moves and was able to dodge his arrow, which is able to move at comparable speeds to Mayuri's Shunpo, which is even faster than the Hirenkyaku. All of this is to say that Mayuri should be relative to these FDL speeds, and Kenpachi would be even faster than Mayuri. With post-training Ichigo being even faster than Kenpachi, it would be more than fair to say that Ichigo in his Shikai state is relative to the speed of Uryu's Hirenkyaku, and Soul Society Ichigo being lightspeed is actually backed up by quite a few things, like Zero's arguably being light, Chad blocking Gantenbine's light cannon, and several characters being able to dodge and block Quincy arrows, which are also possibly lightspeed. Some might argue that it isn't actually light because it's called spiritual light, but let's not forget that spiritual particles, or reishi, are just particles that make up the dead. So would that not mean that spiritual light is the same thing as spiritual photons? Logically, they would be the same, and as such, all the aforementioned attacks would be lightspeed. Anyway, both Bankai and Hollow Mask would be a 10 times amp to Ichigo's stats, and as such, Hollow Mask Ichigo would be around 150 times faster than light. After the Soul Society arc, Ichigo trains to control his Hollow Mask, but we don't know how much stronger he would have gotten through his training, so let's just jump straight into the Arrancar arc. Remember how I said Continental Plus Ichigo would be supported with the Arrancar arc? Well, that mostly stems from Ukiora's Lanza del Relampago, which had an explosive yield of over 200 petatons of TNT, or multi-continental. Given that Ukiura did this in his second release, which would be around 100 times stronger than his base, and Hollow Mask Ichigo is blatantly overpowering base Ukiura, it would actually back up the Continental Plus scaling, since base Ukiura would be just below what we got from Hollow Mask Ichigo during the Soul Society. This is made even more consistent as the Gran Rey Zero would be able to destroy all of Las Noches, which would require country to Continental Plus levels of power, and seeing as all the Espada can utilize it, even someone like Yami, who Bankai Ichigo manhandled, would scale to this country to Continental Plus level of power. Hollow Mask Ichigo and base Ukiura are shown as pretty relative in speed, so because both of Ukiura's releases would be times 10 amps, it would put second Resurrection Ukiura at a whopping 15,000 times faster than light. Ichigo, of course, wouldn't scale to this during their fight, but afterwards, there is a good argument to be made that he has actually surpassed the power of his Vasto Lord estate. We know that Yami is the strongest and most durable out of the Espada, and Hollow Mask Ichigo is blatantly able to overpower Yami with the Getsuga Tensho. It didn't leave a very deep cut, but we already know that Yami is incredibly tough, so not cutting off his head in one go is very understandable. While this might not put Ichigo above his Vasto Lord form, I think it at least means he's relative to it, something that is sort of implied by the design of his Hollow Mask. This same Ichigo was then struggling against Gin, who is far inferior to even a pre-evolution Aizen, who after awakening the Hogyoku evolves far beyond his previous level of power and reaches a level where he considers himself to be transcendent above any Soul Reaper or Hollow. Seeing as pre-evolution Aizen was somewhat weaker than Shika Yamamoto, but not to a degree where he thought he had no chance of winning, and third evolution Aizen said that he transcended all Soul Reapers, it is safe to say that even if Yamato had achieved Bankai, Aizen would still be vastly superior. Since Zangai Ichigo surpassed 4th evolution Aizen, just like 3rd evolution Aizen surpassed Yamamoto, we could say that Dangai Ichigo is at least a Bankai level above Aizen, or at the absolute bare minimum, 100 times stronger and faster than Shika Yamamoto. Yamamoto is of course far beyond the level of any Espada, and even Vasto Lord Ichigo doesn't hold a candle to him. But for this, let's just say that at a bare minimum, Vasto Lord Ichigo and Shika Yamamoto are relative in speed. That would therefore make Dangai Ichigo around 1.5 million times faster than light. You might be wondering how Dangai Ichigo would only be 100 times Vasto Lord if he goes from being multi-continental to shattering what is practically a black hole. But remember, I am only counting the 100 times difference as a speed multiplier. Yamamoto is clearly far more powerful than Vasto Lord even while not even using his Shikai, so while I'm lowballing the speed difference to 100 times, the power difference would actually be many magnitudes greater. Fullbringer Ichigo isn't really that interesting, so I'm not gonna really talk about him. The important thing to note is that he goes back to being as powerful as he was before the Dangai. Now, we finally get to the interesting part of the scaling. The 1000-year Blood War arc. With this arc, there is a question that I see a lot of people ask. Well, there are many questions about the 1000-year Blood War scaling, but what I'm specifically talking about right now is that the captains seemingly don't get any stronger in between the Arrancar and 1000-year Blood War arc, yet they can go from fighting the Espada to fighting the much higher scaling Stern Ritters. This would give us two possibilities. Either, 1, the Espada scale much higher than Continental to Multi-Continental, or 2, the captains did get stronger off-screen. I would personally say that the captains probably did get stronger. Remember that in Bleach, the best way to get stronger is to grow as a person and get closer to your Sanpakuto spirit, instead of doing a bunch of physical training. It is very possible that with the incoming threat of the Stern Ritters, the captains were pushed to get exponentially stronger, especially those who lost their Bankai in the first invasion and were forced to train extra to overcome their disadvantage. If Ichigo can go from being on the level of an Espada to surpassing his Dangai self in a matter of days, I don't think it's unfair to say that the captains, who have a lower potential than Ichigo, could reach levels of power a good amount below even that of Shikai Ichigo. With that explanation, it is high time we actually get into the scaling, and let's jump straight into the annoyance that is Gremmy. Gremmy, and specifically his infamous feat of creating outer space, has and will always be something that the scaling community will never agree on. For those unaware, Gremmy has the ability to bring his imagination into reality. With this, he can do many things, and one of them is to create a pocket dimension that contains a starry sky and arguably a galaxy in the background. We know that this isn't just a portal and is instead an entire pocket dimension, as it's been confirmed in the novels. The question that then comes up is, does he scale to it? This is a fair question to ask, since it seems to be purely a hacks-based ability. But there is evidence to support this actually scaling to Grimmy. The reason being that all abilities in Bleach are based around spiritual pressure to some degree. Quincy abilities specifically are based around the process of reishi enslavement, where they absorb the reishi from the surroundings and combine it with their own Reiryoku to form weapons and use their shifts. It doesn't really make sense for every shift to be based around this process, except for the visionary. We also know that the shrift has limits, something that doesn't make a lot of sense if it was purely based around imagination. Even if we were to say that Grimmy himself doesn't scale to it, it is very likely that Kenpachi does. As mentioned earlier, his ability has limits, and the most prominent example of this is when Grimmy tries to make himself as powerful or more powerful than Kenpachi and dies as a result. So Grimmy can imagine himself creating outer space, but he can't imagine himself being more powerful than Kenpachi. Pair this with the fact that it's implied that he couldn't just imagine Kenpachi dead, and it's obvious that Kenpachi's power is greater than the creation of a pocket dimension containing stars and possibly even a galaxy. The most common rebuttal to this was calling it an outlier, but with the 1000-Year Blood War anime, that is no longer the case. This is due to just the spiritual pressure emanating from one Squad Zero member upon activating their Bankai is enough to shake the entirety of the 3 realms. Just shaking one universe would require high multi-solar system levels of power, and shaking 3 universes would put them at multi-solar system level plus. Considering that someone like Gerard would far surpass the Squad Zero members in their Shikai and might even be superior to their Bankai selves, given that Uryu is able to defeat Senjimaru, it would scale Bankai Kenpachi far above the levels necessary to shake the 3 realms, and as such Shikai Kenpachi being multi-solar system to galaxy level is consistent. But the question still stands. How strong are the top tiers? And specifically, how strong is Ichigo? With the use of both his Bankai and the Horn of Salvation, Ichigo is able to kill Yuha. Yuha's plan was of course to merge all the 3 realms back together to recreate the primordial universe the Soul King once separated. It is pretty ambiguous on how Yuha was going to do this, but the Can't Fear Your Own World novels elaborate on what the plan actually was. As stated, Yuha was going to destroy the boundary that separates the realms. This boundary is known as Garganta. Garganta is a realm of reishi that surrounds all universes and dimensions in Bleach, which means that at a bare minimum, to destroy such a structure, Yuha would need to be universal. Garganta has also been referred to as an endless expanse, which could imply that it is infinite in size, something that would actually be necessary if you believe that the Muken is also infinite in size, which the original Japanese for the manga and the Japanese dialogue in the anime do directly say. So Garganta being infinite in size makes sense. This would then push Yuha to high universal. Realistically, I think this is where Bleach scaling caps out at. There are arguments for 4D scaling, but those really just aren't as good in my opinion. Like for example, one argument goes that Garganta, the 3 realms along with the Dangai, are all space-times, and as such Yuha would need to be universal plus, but that isn't really the case. I don't want to go in depth, but understand that the 4th dimension is not a physical space like the 3rd dimension. It's not like a barrier that would stop 2 realms from merging. Time and space are effectively 2 sides of the same coin. For someone to be 4D, they would need to be able to destroy time itself, which just isn't something that Yuha needed to do, nor was it implied that he was going to do it. Don't get me wrong, the realms are undeniably their own spacetimes. I'm not denying that. It just really doesn't mean anything in this case. The same kind of goes for the Kototsu, which is stated to govern spacetime, but that would just give it spacetime manipulation. It wouldn't actually put it at 4D. In terms of speed, Ichigo in his true Shikai self is implied to have regained the power he had but after his Dangai training, which makes sense considering he can kill Soul King Yuha, who is much stronger than Aizen, who in turn is implied to be stronger than he was in his 4th evolution. This would therefore put true Shikai Ichigo at 1.5 million times FTL, and from there it's really simple. Bankai is a 10 times amp, the Horn of Salvation should be the same as his Holomask, so another 10 times amp, making for a collective 100 times amp, putting 1000 Year Blood War Ichigo at 150 million times FTL. So for our final tally, Ichigo went from being around Continental with MFTL plus speeds during the Soul Society arc to being high universal with speeds exceeding 150 million times the speed of light at the end of the 1000 Year Blood War arc.